Dead Rising. It's a series that I've had a bit of a love-hate relationship with. Most of the hate relies in the later half of the series, more specifically on the fourth title. So when the people at Capcom announced they were going to do a remaster of the original game, I was like... Of course, when I saw things like this...
If you've played the original, rest assured that its core remains unchanged in this Deluxe Remaster. We did our best to respect the direction of the original game. We kept the fundamental gameplay the same while improving upon the user experience. With this, we believe that both veterans and newcomers alike will be able to enjoy a fresh experience.
That sounded super, but then things started popping up, such as the censorship and various other things. So I decided to get my hands on it and dive into it and make a video about it. Because I, MangaKamen, have taken it upon myself to dive back into Willamette and to talk about what really matters with this game, and if it actually lives up to the hype of the original Dead Rising. Spoilers ahead, and remember...
I've covered wars, you know. What? Did you just say zombies?
Take a look out there!
Zombie Paradise Action. Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster.
That's just how it is.
Just to make sure we're on the same page, Dead Rising follows the exploits of Frank West as he investigates the locked-down town of...
the small town of Willamette,
where he discovers the zombie outbreak has occurred and now he's stuck in the Willamette Mall for 3 days. Trying to survive, find the scoops, and get out alive to expose the truth to the world. I'm gonna be straight up, in terms of the actual story of Dead Rising in the remaster, this is probably the least touched element in it. As far as I can tell, the story in the first game and the remaster are essentially the same. It's almost line for line, keyword there being almost. So from that perspective, if you're interested in the actual story of Dead Rising, then you can either take the original or the remaster and still have the same beats. The only difference is how the lines are delivered. As you can imagine and probably know, the entire voice cast was replaced. Most notably TJ Rotolo, who the original voice actor for Frank West didn't get called back. Which, smooth move, Capcom. You didn't even try to contact the guy to see if he wanted to come back. I do have issues with that because some characters will obviously be defined by their voice actors. It's why so many people believe that Mark Hamill's Joker is the definitive Joker, or Dan Green is Yami Yugi, or David Hayter is Solid Snake. This isn't to say that the new cast of characters did a bad job, but it doesn't have that same kick as it does in the original. Let's compare this iconic line right here.
I've covered wars, you know.
Second verse, same as the first.
I've covered wars, you know.
Oh my goodness, that's so much better.
It's the same line, but the delivery is what makes it all the stronger, and Rotolo's snark really feels a lot more genuine. Of course, there are going to be people in the comments who will feel the opposite, and that's fine. Gotta love the internet sometimes. There are other things, like, can we talk about the UI of the game? In the original, you had this brilliant blue earth with stuff popping up at the bottom of the screen like it was a news report, which makes sense since Frank was a photojournalist. However, when we look towards the new version... Listen, on its own, it's not a terrible UI, but it's boring, especially in comparison to the original, which had a connecting link and theme to Frank West himself, and it's even more so with the pause menu. Normally, I don't make a big deal out of these things, since it's not something that I find to be a big of an issue, but I do find this to be a bit of an odd choice, since there's been a bit of a trend where colors being removed from the UI. This isn't a condemnation of the remaster, but it is significant of some oddities in the game with its presentation. Graphically, the game looks great, something that the Resident Evil remakes managed to really shine in that regard, though I will admit that some of the costumes in the game, especially the DLC ones you have to pay money for, or pre-ordered the game to get the original Frank West skin, yeah, some of those will have obvious clipping issues, and some will actually block your sight during gameplay. That being said, there are also some small comparisons I want to bring up, as these can be a bit of a build-up for how you feel about the game. Take for example, glass physics. There was a review I saw that basically got on the case for the game, complaining about how the glass would just disappear, but looking towards the original, it had a similar effect as well. Or how about stairs? In the original, Frank really wouldn't switch up his gait to accommodate the stairs, but in the remaster he does. Though you will notice that in both versions, there is some clipping of his feet through the stairs. These are but small examples of the presentation that the remaster has in comparison to the original. We do need to remember that part of the reason for Dead Rising to be made in the first place was to test the limits of how many characters they can put onto the screen for the system. And these things I bring up, glass physics and walking on stairs, they're little things that ultimately do not matter when it comes to the game itself. They're just little refinements and ticks that most people won't be able to care about when they're playing the game. I mean, they'd be more interested in not being chewed on by zombies. Though I will imagine that the removal of mirrors can be a bit of a turnoff, since we now know that Frank West, he could probably still be a vampire. I know that's stupid. Though one thing I do appreciate is the addition of voice acting outside of cutscenes.
Frank, right now, you're in the entrance plaza.
Oh my god! You can talk!
Otis, the survivors, psychopaths, and even Frank himself can voice the lines that are voiceless in the original, and that's a nice touch that adds a bit more personality to the survivors and makes them feel a lot more like actual people and not just NPCs. They make you feel like you actually care about them. It adds a more personal touch to the game and adds a bit more refinement to it. Whether or not you think this is a good addition is up to you, I suppose, since the voice acting can be hit or miss.
No way! I'm staying with Ross! If I'm gonna die, I want it to be with him!
Take it easy, it's just a drawing.
Now, there's one more thing we need to talk about when it comes to the presentation of the game, and that's censorship. Nah. Bigger. Before the game came out, there was a bit of a hubbub where there were some changes and removal of aspects of the game, and I'll have to dip into the gameplay section of this video for talking about this. There are three notable pieces of censorship: the removal of erotica photos, changing the psychopath's lines about communists and Viet Cong, and another psychopath, Larry, getting a complete design overhaul. Let's tackle Larry first. In the original Dead Rising, Larry was a Chinese immigrant butcher who loved his meat and looked like this. And in the remaster, he was changed to look like this. I've stated before, while the change is weird, it's understandable as Larry in the original was a bit of a stereotype. Basically, there was a stereotype of a dirty Chinese butcher. I'm not saying I approve of it, and Dead Rising isn't above doing caricatures of people in the past. I mean, just look at how they depict Redditors and people who complain on Twitter all day in Dead Rising 2.
I knew I wouldn't die, virgin. Oh, I can't wait.
What a freak.
It's understandable that they would want to be a bit more safe than sorry when they're making a new game, especially in the political and social environment that we're in nowadays, even if I don't agree with that mindset. Although, to be fair, he is the only psychopath in the game whose design has seen a drastic change, so it sticks out like a sore thumb. Maybe if other psychopaths have gotten updated looks and designs, then this wouldn't be too much of an issue. But it's still a form of censorship that does need to be addressed, especially when I get to the bigger issue of concerning all three of these points. If anything, what they should have done is added updated designs for the other psychopaths, so that way it wouldn't stick out as much. Next is Cliff, who had his dialogue changed.
I know why. It's because you're Viet Cong.
It's because you're a mole.
This one, ironically, is a bit worse than Larry's redesign, since Cliff was a Vietnam veteran in the original game. It's a more generic line for sure in the remaster, but because of this change, the subtext and the nuance as a Vietnam veteran suffering PTSD-fueled psychotic break is practically erased. Small changes like this can remove a lot from a character and story and turn them into a generic bad guy. In the case of Cliff, he no longer feels like a victim who cracked under the pressure of a zombie outbreak and had flashbacks to the war. It also removes the narrative tie-in that Cliff's story had to the overall theme of Dead Rising. Since the entire story of Dead Rising focuses on how the American government screwed up in a foreign country that was the home to the zombie insect outbreak that led to the destruction of an entire village and served as the motivation for the main bad guy in the game, Carlito. So removing this example from the game, in my opinion, weakens the overall themes of the game, which leads us in the last bit of censorship, the removal of erotica photos from the game, and oh boy, here we go again, Kamen going up to bat for a well-justified removed aspect of a game, better leave a huge annoying comment before he explains himself and In the game, Frank West can take photos, and there are a few categories that they fall into, stuff like drama, comedy, or horror. In the original game, you could also take erotica photos. This would include taking pictures of characters who have things like cleavage, underwear, and etc. One look online and you'll see there are people who are saying that they are fine with this aspect being removed. Some are even cheering for it like they were clowns.
Frickin' hate clowns.
Now, I'm not one to lose sleep over this kind of change either, but my issue is that it ignores a few things. The first is that while there were some issues with this sort of mechanic back in the day, Obviously, there were complaints when you're taking pictures of women, and even in a video game, there wasn't enough controversy to prevent the off-the-record title bring it back when you're able to get the photography going on. They even made jokes of it in some promo material.
Try to center your subject in those intersections, like this. Not like this.
What I'm saying is that this didn't cause an issue back in the day, and it feels like a change just to be safe in today's age. Just because you have something in a game, that doesn't mean that the game endorses it. I mean, we're killing people all left and right in this game. That doesn't mean that the game endorses murder. And this also ignores how Kent was supposed to be a foil to Frank West, and to actually make the players think about how unethical their own photography has been in the game. It's a satirization on how sensational American journalism and documenting people at large became in the 2000s. When Dead Rising came out in 2006, it was about a year after the Streisand effect began, when journalists did take salacious photos of celebrities in order to get ahead in life. It's what photojournalists did during that time period. We're literally talking about taking advantage of a tragedy where people are being eaten by zombies. Whether it be for drama, horror, or taking a quote-unquote sexy picture, it's another one of Dead Rising themes about exploitation and how Frank is unfortunately a part of the system. And it's why Kent's willingness to go so far for his photos makes a lot of sense when you look at it this way. And finally, the last part of this is that it's really selective. There are two parts in the remaster that make the removal of erotica photos a little iffy in my opinion. The first is near the end of the game when you're asked by a survivor you save, Cheryl, who asks you to come to the safe house and take pictures of her. In the original, when you take the photos, you get erotica photos while guys are cheering in the background. And in the remaster, the same thing happens. The only difference is that it's voiced and the photos have no genre. But the bigger issue is...
Looks like you lured another man in here, you little whore. No, I didn't. Please, help me. Let's see just how shameless you are, you dirty little skank. Say hello to my little friend. No, not again. Help me.
Officer. Officer, can I talk to you for a minute? I mean, look, what did that woman do? This seems a little,
Shut your pie hole!
Oh yeah, gotta take out the photos that gave you bonus points for sexualized content, but a female cop running a phallic object around a woman's legs and implying that she might have done some nasty stuff with that object, oh, that's gotta stay in no matter what! You're given conflicting messages, and it's confusing that we keep getting these things in, but remove the erotica photos. I understand that some people are going to say in response to this, that I have a million reasons why I don't like these changes in the game, but most people who don't have the ability to argue will just boil it down to that I disagree with this change because you just like the horny, and then turn around and praise Lady D from Resident Evil Village. That isn't the point of my issues here. The point for me is that when you're claiming that you're trying to make a remaster of a beloved title and trying to be faithful to it as close as you can, and making changes like this feels really off-putting. It feels like we're doing this for the sake of avoiding controversy and not having creative solutions to fix the issues, and instead just doing the lazy route and removing them. One solution is to have the satire be a lot more obvious. Maybe Frank chastises himself when he takes these kinds of pictures. A survivor points out how that's inappropriate. Frank comes to the realization that he doesn't want to end up like Kent, or make it just a lot easier. Just make it so you can get erotica photos of the guys as well. At the end of the day, this sort of thing in the grand scheme of things doesn't matter for the game. It's a video game, and the original title is available on Steam that you can get a fraction of the price of the remaster. These are things that you could ignore and just enjoy the remaster. That's what I did, and I did have a fun time regardless of this, but as a reviewer and someone who gives their opinion on the internet for being paid, it's inevitable that I do bring this up. It feels like modernization to avoid issues from a small amount of people who will complain for the sake of complaining. Well, good job, you just had another annoying side of the internet complain about it. I hope you're happy with yourself, Capcom.
Looks like 72 yards. I can blow his head off clean from here.
So for this section, we'll be talking about the gameplay changes from the original Dead Rising. I'll give context for the game so you can have an idea what happens, so let's begin. Prestige points, or PP.
You're kidding?
They're essentially the experience points of the games, and when you get enough, you level up. And and when you level up, you gain abilities and improve stats, which can make the game a lot easier and make Frank go from a wimpy little runt to a zombie-killing machine. When I played the remaster, it was really apparent to me that you were able to accumulate PP a lot faster than the original, and I'm not the only one who saw this. In comparison to the first survivors you can get in the original, same amount of PP when a survivor joins, but you do the easier survivor escorts at the beginning of the remaster, you'll at least be at level 4, and that's assuming you didn't take pictures in the beginning of the game, which can also net you PP as well. So you can get Frank to be a lot more powerful and a lot faster in the original, and I'm not sure how to feel about that. I was able to get to the max of level 50 in my first playthrough by saving as many survivors as I could. The game overall has a lot of elements that make the game a lot easier, and I was able to get the Saint achievement, the achievement that you receive when you're saving 50 survivors in the game. An achievement I may want to add is less than 10% of all players manage to acquire. What aids in the game being easier is the auto-save system. Basically, whenever you get out of a cutscene or when you enter a new area, the game will create a save file for you. So if you die, you continue from when you entered into the area. This is extremely exploitable for the game, since if you get overwhelmed by a psychopath or you lose a survivor, you just have to let Frank die and you'll essentially respawn with everything you had before you entered the area. Same amount of health, same weapons, and the knowledge of what's going to happen in the area. We're stuck in a bloody time loop. Speaking of weapons, they seem to be causing a lot more damage to zombies nowadays. Here's an example with a cash register. These elements make the game a lot easier to play and fight against zombies and psychopaths. That isn't a bad thing per se, but it really plays to a much more casual audience. Though I would argue that the original Dead Rising wasn't too hard once you got used to the original controls. In fact, the entire point of the game was to be a roguelike, meaning as you kept playing more and more, you got better and better and got used to what the game demanded of you. Granted, the controls in Dead Rising Remaster have been changed, with one of the biggest changes being the evasion skill. In the original, you had to push down on the left stick twice in the same direction to throw yourself in that direction, which was cumbersome. However, in the remastered version, it's now a simple button prompt. I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it makes the dodge, once you get, a lot more fluid and effective. And unlike the original, when you use guns, you can actually shoot while moving. I appreciate these kinds of changes since they do add some fluidity to the gameplay, but if you're going to go back to the old control scheme, the game does offer that. These things make the game easier, but I'm not saying that they're the same level as the PP system giving you faster levels. There's a difference between having smoother controls and giving a boost to numbers. One of them requires the player to actually rely on reaction time and good judgment, while the latter is just an inflation of numbers to get the increased abilities faster. One is more natural, the other is artificial. The quality of life changes are things that I do appreciate, such as each weapon now having a durability bar, meaning you can see how much of health the weapon has now. In the original game, the only indicator you have of the weapon's health is that it would fade in and out before it would break. The objective arrow was a bit of a mess in the original game and was replaced with a compass that also shows the distance that Frank has to go to a selected case and scoop. When you equip a new piece of clothing, it'll be added to the clothing locker. It's an element that was in Dead Rising 3, so you don't have to trek across the mall again if you want a specific article of clothing you already unlocked. At the safe room or places that you can save manually, you can actually speed up time, something that wasn't in the original game. These sorts of things make the game play a lot smoother. They don't really add or subtract from the overall difficulty of the game, but they make the game a lot more accessible to the player. It's a refinement of the gameplay that makes it easier to control Frank. Of course, there's one thing to really consider, and that's the AI of the game. No, not some abomination of artwork where people have 7 fingers and melted faces. I'm referring to the actual intelligence of the survivors and the zombies. If you know anything about Dead Rising survivors, they're often the poster children for horrible escort missions. The original game came out during the time when escort missions were the hottest thing in the world of gaming, and unfortunately, they're the kind of people who would lose their minds the moment they stepped in ankle-deep water or a Twitter user who came across an opposing opinion. Thankfully, in the remaster, they aren't as bad, but they still aren't perfect. Not all survivors move at the same speed, and I understand that there are older and injured survivors, but there are a few that are slower. One of the most notable ones is Alyssa. She's part of a trio of survivors that you can find in the gun shop in an unannounced scoop. She is one of the worst survivors who is super slow when following Frank. And that is because she is something called a tethered survivor. What is a tethered survivor? It's a type of survivor that follows other survivors instead of Frank, most of the time. And because of that, she tends to be a lot slower when you're escorting her back to the safe house. I recall there being other survivors that acted like that as well during my playthrough. Now, this wouldn't be much of an issue except for the fact that when you're changing areas, you won't be able to tell how far a survivor can be before they can enter into a new area by following you. And if you enter an area and leave a survivor in another area, they'll start to lose their health. So they apparently can't have the brain power to see me opening a door and follow me through it. Good idea! In order to fix this, you have to return to the area that they're at and wait for their slow asses to get closer to the door. What puzzles me is that this issue was already solved in Dead Rising 2. When you're trying to get into a new area or get to the safe house, any survivors who are following you close enough will have a green door icon pop over their heads or their icons as they follow you. That alerts you that yes, they will follow you into the next area and you don't have to worry or wait. It's not like the game hasn't taken notes from other titles in this series. The clothing locker I brought up earlier is something from Dead Rising 3. So why can't an icon system like this be used for survivors so you don't accidentally leave them in other areas and can make sure they know how a frickin' door works? The other notable AI to bring up is the zombies. You're playing a zombie game, so of course the zombies better be good. Like survivors, it's been reported that the AI of the zombies has been improved, but in my experience and shown online, the zombies aren't as aggressive. Notably, they even seem to be a lot slower than in the original. And while zombies will latch onto Frank, you're given different options to shake them off. You unlock more as you level up. Plus, hey, at the very least, the male zombies can now bite Frank in the crotch. Something that was only notable that the female zombies did in the original game. Now, if only that equality could be done throughout the rest of the game. All this can and does make the game a bit easier, with a few hiccups here and there, and that was a purposeful choice. Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster's director Ryosuke Miura gave an interview to The Gamer about why they did this, and I quote, "We know from seeing how players respond to the original game that a lot of people unfortunately bounced off the game and got tired of it and put it down before they really got to the great stuff. And it was such a shame. If we're going to bring the Deluxe Remaster and the same thing would happen all over again, just in the name of maintaining exactly the same experience." Murai also noted this from the same article. "The only thing I remember about the game is the grind of the day one." Now, this may be my own memory of the original game and my own experience talking, but whenever I hear a developer talking about they've heard from their audience, especially considering this franchise, I can't help remember something very important.
Because this game has got so much more side content and stuff to explore and find, we did a lot of testing and we found that people could never complete the stuff in the amount of time, and then we had to give you so much time to do it. The time meant nothing.
I'm sorry, whenever I hear a developer using like groups they've heard back from players, especially for a game that's 18 years old, I can't help but be a bit skeptical in that regard. While I won't say that it's in the same direction of Dead Rising 4, I do feel like that is with the changes with censorship, the developers of Dead Rising Deluxe Remastered did a bit too much overcorrection, especially considering that when you're promoting your game like this.
If you've played the original, rest assured that its core remains unchanged in this Deluxe Remaster. We did our best to respect the direction of the original game. We kept the fundamental gameplay the same while improving upon the user experience. With this, we believe that both veterans and newcomers alike will be able to enjoy a fresh experience. Our goal was to ensure that today's players would experience the same shock players felt when the original game was released.
You're not giving the exact same experience to the new players or the old players of the original game. Now, I can appreciate the quality of life changes, like switching the dodge roll button, or allowing the players to speed up time since there's a lot of free time between scoops. But there's a simple manner to please everyone with this. Allow separate difficulties. The only reason why I'm even harping on the easier difficulty of the remaster is because it was touted to be a faithful remaster. But even in the gameplay elements doesn't hold true. And remember, you can change how the control scheme worked. You can use the older controls. So why can we not have the same option to have the same level of difficulty in the original game in the remaster? Allowing the players to have a choice to play both the original difficulty of the game or even adding an additional difficulty setting would be the best choice for this, even if it's just a numbers deal. Make it so PP can't be accumulated so easily, zombies are a little tankier, and maybe the psychopaths don't get caught up on things. It's an overcorrection of making the game easier for newcomers. It's like slathering yellow paint on something in a game in an attempt to make the players to... Oh no! I want want to be clear, I don't hate the game for this choice. I just have an issue with the balancing of the game's difficulty, and there are simple fixes that could easily be optional so you can have a more faithful recreation of the original game. I should also point out that the infinitive mode also has differences as well, such as being able to save and come back to play, which you couldn't do in the original. So they are making it a little easier, but it's something that should have been done in the original game because that would require you to actually complete infinitive mode. You would have to play continuously for hours on end.
Humanity has proven itself to be quite adept at making mistakes.
Legitimately, the Dead Rising Remaster Deluxe is an odd beast to say the least. On the one hand, I certainly enjoyed my time playing it and managed to get quite a few hours of entertainment, and hopefully a halfway decent video for you all to enjoy. However, there are little things that I do not agree with or appreciate with the game, especially considering how the game was marketed as a faithful remaster. I understand that you have to make some changes, especially since the original game is still available on Steam for a much lower price. That being said, while the experiences were fun and when I played the game, when I was playing it, I was a little put off about everything, like leveling up so quickly. I'm not opposed to there being easier difficulties in games, but I would say that it should be an optional thing. I want to bring up this part of Murai's quote that I brought up in the last section. And it was such a shame that if we were going to bring the Deluxe Remaster and the same thing would happen all over again, just in the name of maintaining exactly the same experience. Remasters are supposed to be the same experience as the original game, only with a different coat of paint. If you're trying to maintain the core of the game, you need to be faithful to the original game. Quality of life changes are certainly fine. The dodge roll and adding things like a proper compass to show where the players have to go is perfectly fine, since it's fixing the issues with the original game. However, to me, they overcompensated the game. If this was a standalone title of Dead Rising or wasn't pushed as a remaster, these issues wouldn't be too much of a problem for me. Hell, a reimagining of the original game would have been fine as well. Lord knows that Dead Rising isn't against concepts of what-if stories, with Off the Record being one of my personal favorite titles in the entire series.
I'm going to your anus zone!
My point is, if you're going to make so many changes to a remaster, including over a correction on issues that do fundamentally change the experience of the original, at that point it's more like a remake than a remaster. And with the original game being available on Steam for a much lower price, if I want to experience the original game, I can do that. Overall, Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster isn't a bad game, but to me, it's a problematic remaster, bordering on the fact that it changes a bit too much. Fix the AI of the original game? Sure, there were a ton of complaints about it. Change up the guide area? Again, lots of complaints. Text too small in the original? Let's bump up a few sizes, shall we? Pump up the experience system to make it a lot easier to survive? That wasn't an issue in the original game. The original Dead Rising was a rough around the edges experience, but it was in the first the franchise that managed to spawn several other games, each of them adding something new and improving on the original formula. You were a bit too much of a side grade though, and I bloody hate you! It's funny that I bring up these two titles in this part of the video because they too had similar issues. They tried to make things a lot more approachable even if it meant bringing in a wider audience, and they suffered for it. Stuff like in Dead Rising 3, the time limit may as well not even be a factor, and in DR4 they just got rid of it because of focus groups. Now with the overcorrection of the remaster, it really feels like Frank becomes a bit too much of a badass from the get-go, when that was the end goal of the game. That you would grow alongside Frank, learning the ins and outs of the game and being rewarded with the up stats and new abilities. You would learn from your mistakes and in turn would allow you to get to know the game on a fundamental level. Even if you died, you were given the option to restart the campaign with the levels you accumulated, so it wasn't like you lost all your progress. Plus, you'd have the knowledge of important loot locations and where survivors would be. We do need to remember, Dead Rising is a horror game. While it's not on the same vein as scary horror games, Dead Rising is a survival horror game. Difficulty in survival is kind of a prerequisite since to instill a sense of urgency and dread in the players. So I'm kind of confused when avoiding the first day grind was brought up as a reason for the changes, since that's the point of the level up system and to get better at the game, to fight against the unwashed zombie masses. I don't know, perhaps this is me and as someone who didn't find the original game to be that difficult when I first played it, but different strokes for different folks, I suppose. Regardless, Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster is far from being a terrible game. I dare say it's a pretty good one and a fun one as well, but as a fan of Dead Rising and someone who enjoys a bit of a challenge from the original titles, it really didn't live up to all the hype that it was given. Still, if you're looking to play the game and have a more modern experience, I would suggest playing it, but if you're looking for the classic experience, the original game is honestly still widely available to play. Regardless, I'm MangaKamen, thank you for watching, and remember folks, have a fantastic day!